This is Fisher Flying Products. I'm Dave Hurtner. Welcome to the Nest. Please take the time to hit the subscribe button and click on the bell so you get notified when we post new videos. This week for our newsletter, we're going to be conducting an interview with Steve McKamey, who is a great friend of Fisher Flying Products. Steve came to know Fisher early on working with Wayne Eisen and back when they were designing the early Fisher aircraft in the 80s. And later on came to me in a very interesting way. I was at Oshkosh and I was sitting in our booth, and Steve's wife came up and looked at the airplane that was I had on display, and she said, "I've got to get Steve. I got to get him back here. He's been looking for you." And she called him on the phone, and he'd already left the show, and he came back and he said, "Hi, I'm Steve McKamey, and I'm an aeronautical engineer." And I said, basically, sit. And I had a lot of interesting questions for him about wooden aircraft, and it turned out he has a wealth of knowledge. In the time since I've known him, he's purchased a Fisher Dakota Hawk, and he's rebuilt it, and he's doing all kinds of interesting things. And so I sent him the package that I mentioned earlier in our previous video to answer some questions in a video format. Today's COVID situation has us doing things remotely, so I've cut together my questions with his answers, and hopefully you'll enjoy this. So here's Steve and my first question.
Hi Dave, how are you doing today?
Hi Steve. Can you tell us and our listeners why you are interested in wooden aircraft?
I've been around wooden aircraft for a long time. Back in the 80s, I used to hang around with the Team Minimax guys, the original Team Minimax guys, and including Wayne Eisen and Jim Cawley, who were also involved with Mike Fisher at the same time. The Minimaxes shared wood and fabric construction, a lot of the same motors, and a lot of the same ideas. Of course, a lot of the designs were by Wayne Eisen, and he worked for both companies. I was also involved with a guy in the local EAA chapter in Tullahoma named Eric Clutton. And Eric Clutton had a rather eclectic home-built parasol called Fred. Fred had a scimitar prop, had a semi-open cockpit. It was a parasol. And Eric sold plans for Fred, and every night about sundown, Eric would take off in Fred, and Fred was, a low and slow wooden fabric airplane. He'd had all kinds of motors in it. And he would fly around until just about sunset, and then he'd come back to Tullahoma and land and put it in the hangar and go home. Eric gave a presentation one time to the local EAA chapter about how many times he had crashed Fred. And I think it's on YouTube, and if you've ever seen it, it's absolutely hilarious, and you need to go see it. But the one thing I took away from his numerous crashes and rebuilds of Fred was that he always walked away. And there's a lot to be said for walking away even from a crash. And I have done it once, and I've done it once in a Dakota Hawk, so I can talk to that. But being an engineer, I started to look into it a little bit more. The de Havilland Mosquito was an all-wood aircraft in World War II and a very successful fighter bomber. The wood construction has several advantages over metal, not the least of which is the way it dissipates energy in a crash. And I found out that my friend Eric was not the only one that had walked away from a splintered wooden aircraft. That story was fairly common. And so, I got to be intrigued with wooden fabric aircraft. I ended up flying a lot of the Team Minimaxes, including a near-death experience in a Team HiMax. Had to do with control cable routing. But it never had an issue with the wood structure of any of those aircraft. So I've always been a fan of wood and fabric aircraft, and I love the low and slow flying.
Steve, what motivated you to acquire a Fisher design?
I haven't built an airplane from scratch. Back in the late 80s, I bought a partially built KR-2 kit, which was also a wood construction aircraft, and did some work on it, and then decided I didn't like the high wing loading. I heard some stories of pilots that had some difficulties with the KR at Oshkosh, and I thought, maybe I'd like something a little more low and slow. So after that, I bought here recently a Fisher Classic partial kit that was built in Florida and then stored away, and got damaged in a hurricane, and so I've got that kit. I've got the Dakota Hawk, which I have bought, had ground looped and had to repair and flown again, and now I've got it down again for repairs, and going to install a D-motor LF-26 on it. I have looking forward to probably building one from scratch, but it'll be a while. I got to retire from my day job first.
Steve, what's it like to build an aircraft in your neck of the woods? Tell us about your home airfields and airfields around you.
Tullahoma, Tennessee has a long and storied history of being involved with aviation that goes all the way back to World War II. William Northern Field was an Army Air Corps training base for bomber pilots, and it had the patented triangle-shaped runways, of which 2 are still active, along with some grass strips that have been added alongside. So when I came here in 1985, well, even going back further than that, when I was in college, they had the EAA National Fly-In here in 1979 and 1980. I first came to Tullahoma in 1980. My very first cross-country as a licensed private pilot was from KDKX to KTHA, which is from Knoxville, Tennessee to Tullahoma. So when I got here in 1985, I went to work at Arnold Air Force Base, Arnold Engineering Development Center, which is the Air Force's largest aerospace ground test facility complex, and it's an incredible test capability, and there's a lot of collected aerospace knowledge in the local area. The Beechcraft Museum, the beach is run by the Parrish family, and it's on the grounds of the Tullahoma Airport. We had several people. Eric Clutton was and still is a local resident here. I think Eric's in his 90s now, but Eric wrote the book Propeller Making for the Amateur, and he also had the kit plane called Fred, which was a small wooden fabric parasol, used VW engines and a scimitar prop. Eric used to fly over my house every day at sundown, every day that was flyable in that aircraft. He has an incredible story of how many times he's crashed and rebuilt Fred, which kind of gave me an appreciation for the robustness and the ability of a wood aircraft to absorb impact and protect the pilot. We also had Tennessee propellers. Steve Brees, who until recently was in Tullahoma, he's now in Rising Fawn, Georgia, but he's still building propellers. We had Lowly and the 5151 over in Aviation Valley, just north of Tullahoma. In the 1980s, Team Minimax was here. Wayne Ison and Jim Colley, who were two people that were also involved with Fisher, were part of Team Minimax, and I got to know those guys. There's a lot of builders here. You can go out to the Tullahoma Airport. There's a lot of private hangars. A lot of the RVs, a lot of tail draggers. It's just a good area to be involved in aviation.
Steve, have you documented or taken video of any of the processes that you've completed on the aircraft you've built?
I documented the rebuild process on 236 Delta Hotel. I got some photos of me doing the safety wiring on the prop bolts. I've got a time lapse of me doing the safety wiring on the brake rotors. I've got several photographs of different parts, including the repair, the one structural repair we had to do. I had a logbook of my KR2 and some still photos, but I passed those along when I sold that kit. So I've been mainly using handwritten logs. I haven't used any of the electronic logs, but I like on the Fisher forums on Facebook. You can see some of the photographs. People, especially Gary Carter and Diedrich Sorensen, have put on there that of their builds and rebuilds, and they do a great job of keeping a video log on Facebook, and I've enjoyed watching those people build theirs.
Steve, everyone has help in building their aircraft. Who's been helping you in your endeavor?
Well, on my rebuild project, I had some help. Had some help from my son Lonnie, my daughter Lissa. I had some help from Rick Lehman, who helped me with some of the engine work, troubleshooting the mags, and eventually the decision to go and buy the E-mags for the O200. I love those, by the way. That O200 ran awesome with the E-mags. I had some help from John Foote, talking about, he consulted with me on glues and splicing methods and other things. I had some help from Sean Sutton, who was renting part of my shop, but he ran a cabinet shop and he had a lot of experience working with wood, so he was actually a help too. I had a lot of help from a lot of different people, and I think that's important. That it kind of you can build an aircraft and you can be good at a lot of things, but there's always one or two things that somebody else is going to have some experience or input for. So it helps to have a community to draw on.
Steve, let our viewers know what it's like to fly your Fisher Flying Products Dakota Hawk.
Well, one place I flew it was from Paragould, Arkansas, across the Mississippi River, which you can see over my shoulder here, to Fayetteville, Tennessee. And that was, I had to check myself out in it when we went to get it. We flew my Cessna 172, Rick Lehman and my son-in-law and myself flew over to Paragould and picked it up, and there was nobody there to check me out in it. So, and it had been a long time since I'd flown a tail dragger, so I went up and did 3 touch and goes in it, actually 4, and then we took off and and headed back to Tennessee, crossed the Mississippi River where I took this picture, and made it back to Fayetteville about sunset. So that was the longest flight I've taken in it. Generally, I've just flown it around here. I've flown it to Moontown. No, I haven't been to Moontown yet. Got to do that. Moontown's a grass strip right outside of Huntsville, Alabama. Flown it to Winchester several times. Just flown it around the area, and it's a lot of fun to fly. I mean, the prop that I had on it was a climb prop, and the first thing I realized when we took off from Paragould was that it would vastly outclimb the Cessna. I took off, shot upwards like a shot out of a cannon, and left them behind. Then I leveled off, and as soon as we leveled off, they went flying by me. But it doesn't cruise quite as fast. But in the configuration that I had with a 100 horsepower engine, a 72 by 48 prop, which was a climb prop, it would not stall power on. It absolutely would not stall power on. I could fly it. One time I flew it down to 25 miles an hour indicated at about 2,500 feet with about a 25 knot headwind right over my house. So I was just hanging there at 25 miles an hour, had full control, full pitch control, full roll control. It was not buffeting, and it was not losing altitude. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. I love it. It's maneuverable, it's nimble, and it lands at 30 miles an hour, which is nice and slow, which makes it easy to learn to fly because the slow landing speed gives you a lot of time to react to whatever's happening.
Steve, what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about building a Fisher aircraft?
Well, if you're thinking about building a Fisher aircraft, I would say just do it. It's actually one that can be built if you're just putting in small increments of time per day. That's one thing I learned in rebuilding it, was that I could do 15 or 20 minutes worth of work. As long as I did it consistently, I got the job done. Now, if you're going to build a whole airplane that way, it's going to take a while. But you will make consistent progress, and you'll be able to see the progress, even working in those small increments. You can get started on it for next to nothing. You don't have to have all the parts and pieces to start building. So, you can pay for it as the money comes in, and it won't set you back. If you go to build, say, an RV, you're going to spend $20,000 to $30,000 just for an RV4, which is the low end RV. You're still going to spend $20,000 to $30,000 more than to build a 2-seat Dakota Hawk. Now the RV, the Dakota Hawk is much roomier than the RV, because I have one, both of them, and it's got almost as much useful load. Just flies about 100 knots slower, but it's also very economical to fly, maintain, and operate. With mine, the 0200 sipped between 4 and 5 gallons an hour, leaned out at altitude. With the D-motor LF26, it'll be even less than that. We're talking 3 to 3.5 an hour. That's makes it very economical to operate. So yeah, buy the tail kit. Dave will send you the tail kit, and you can get started. And all of the basic things that you'll be doing can be done on the tail kit, and you can see whether you like it or not.
Thanks very much, Steve, for sharing your experiences and your project with our viewers. I would like to again invite anyone who's interested in doing the same as Steve did today. Provide me some video answers to some questions that I supply. Don't hesitate to call me, or to I can send it out to you. Just send me a request at dave@fisherflying.com, or give me a call at 519-933-2055, option 1. Thanks again for watching. We try hard to bring you interesting content each week. To help us out, please like and share our videos, and to receive the latest info from Fisher Flying Products, click the subscribe button and ring the bell. See you next time from the nest.